things could soon be looking up for a number of endangered species. The Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species wrapped up in Johannesburg, South Africa this week, where delegates from 182 countries accepted 51 proposals to reform wildlife trade restrictions. These include global bans on trade in pangolins and African grey parrots and the delisting of the Cape Mountain zebra. But one of the biggest moves of the meeting was when delegates called for domestic ivory markets to be shut down and gave states guidelines for how to effectively tackle the trade. So then, what do these guidelines involve, and will this move effectively stem the ivory trade in Africa? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Well, the UN Wildlife Conference CITES concluded business a day earlier than anticipated this week. But on Tuesday, delegates passed a raft of resolutions, including measures to combat wildlife trafficking and cybercrime, as well as closing domestic elephant ivory markets. CCTV's Clementine Logan was at the venue in Johannesburg, where she filed this report.
CITES officials have praised the level of consensus among delegates here in recent days. But when it comes to Africa's elephants, there's little proof of that. Monday's vote to reclassify them to CITES Appendix 1, banning all trade in them dead or alive, failed to get a two-thirds majority. But the African Elephant Coalition, a group of 29 countries led by Kenya, isn't giving up.
And I'm particularly very disappointed by the voting by the EU as a bloc. They are the ones that have blocked elephants from being listed on Appendix 1 of CITES. We might reopen this debate to try and get all members of the COP to understand that it is time to list African elephants on Appendix 1. If we fail, we'll try and focus in implementing the African Elephant Action Plan, and also we'll try also to focus on the consumer states.
Namibia, South Africa and Zimbabwe, all with healthy elephant populations, remain firmly opposed to a trade ban. They say trophy hunting and the sale of live elephants and their parts generate vital funds for conservation.
We are for conservation, but at the same time, sustainable utilization of our resources. So the proposal that was brought by Kenya to now uplist our elephant population from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1 was really going to be suicidal for Zimbabwe. We are going to wait until the next CITES. We will have to work together in SADC to re-strategize where we have done so well. We should also be allowed to make our own choices.
The latest figures paint a bleak picture for the future of Africa's elephants. In August, the great elephant census revealed 30% had disappeared in just 7 years. Last month's elephant status report revealed poaching was the main driver, with an estimated 20,000 killed each year for their tusks, or one every 15 minutes. These are the worst losses in 25 years. COP17 did deliver an important result, though. Delegates here voted to close domestic ivory markets, with China leading the charge. Some say once that's implemented, it could help curb the global appetite for elephant ivory.
There won't be a resale possibility for ivory. So those people who are buying ivory to speculate on future sales as an investment, they're not going to be able to sell it legally. Unfortunately, when you try and get international consensus, concessions are made. And the concession that was made on the domestic sales ban was that if there was no contribution to illegal trade, that was okay. But every illegal market we've ever looked at has contributed to illegal trade. And the key one we're talking about now is really Japan. You know, China, Hong Kong have said they're going to close down. The United States, Thailand is really restricting it. It's really Japan is the last man standing. And there is plenty of evidence that Japan is contributing to the illegal trade.
With such division at CITES, the focus will soon shift back to the battle on the ground. How to strengthen anti-poaching efforts and curb a seemingly insatiable demand. Clementine Logan, CCTV, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, China says it is already taking steps to close down its domestic trade in elephant ivory. To find out more, Clementine Logan sat down with Xu Ling, who is a China Senior Program Officer for the non-governmental organization Traffic.
How far has China gone in closing its market for ivory? What kind of progress has been made and what more needs to be done?
Currently, the market, illegal market, has been controlled very well. And for the legal market, as you know, China in the past 2 years destroyed more than 6 tons of confiscated ivory products. Last September, our President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Obama, they jointly announced, ivory trade ban, in each country. China issued a new regulation to stop all ivory import from other countries. That means no ivory can be legally imported to China. The government will consider to give some time, like 2 years, to the ivory industry to deal with their ivory stockpile.
What efforts are being made to bring Chinese business owners and expats in Africa on board in terms of stopping the ivory trade?
You know, when we arrived in South Africa, we can receive the message from the Chinese embassy. Every people with the China mobile phone can receive this message. To remind us not purchase any ivory product. Last May, traffic worked together with the China SME, Customs, and the Forest Police. We held the first advocacy workshop in Ethiopia. This year, in April, we did the similar advocacy event in South Africa and Mozambique. More than 100 Chinese companies. I think it's almost all big Chinese companies sent the representative to this event. And we also got the support from South Africa embassy and Mozambique Chinese embassy there.
What would you say is the level of awareness among ordinary Chinese people today about how much of a serious problem this is in Africa?
Very few young people know that the ivory is from the dead elephants. They just think ivory is like our teeth, Take out of your teeth will not, make you die. But when we tell the youth that the ivory, all the ivory are from the dead elephants, and as well as the poaching in Africa, we got lots of feedback that the current young generation, they do love elephants. They do want to do some contribution to protect the elephant in wild. And Traffic WWF, as well as the other NGOs, we have done lots of advocacy work, like in airports, in subway, actually in bus stop. We deliver our message, the very direct message to the public.
Are you optimistic that a change is occurring in China in terms of how ivory there is viewed?
As China released the timetable, strengthen the enforcement to on the illegal ivory trade, more and more Chinese become aware that purchasing ivory is totally prohibited. If the government they want to do this, the result should be good. So if the government they support the implementation of the ivory trade ban, I think the illegal trade in ivory and the demand for ivory products will be totally changed.
We're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, my expert guests will help examine the steps needed in Africa to stem the ivory trade. To stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Now to help further unpack the decisions taken at CITES in relation to the ivory trade, I have expert guests standing by in London, David Kadri. He's the head of policy and campaigns at the International Fund for Animal Welfare. In Beijing, Professor Ho Wenping, she's a senior research fellow at the Institute of West Asian and African Studies. To you both, thank you for joining in the discussion. Let's start off with you, David Kadri, in London, and look at the outcomes of the CITES conference on African elephants. First, what is your take on the policy decisions that were taken specifically on African elephants and on the domestic ban on trade in ivory?
Well, there were some good decisions and some not so good decisions. I think in relation to the decision-making mechanism, which was a system set up to sell ivory between countries, I think the fact that that has now been stopped is good news. It's saying to countries that they will no longer be able to sell their stockpiles. In relation to the Appendix 1 uplifting, again, that was disappointing news. The fact that there should have been a precautionary approach, that the countries like China and the US were really leading the strong fight for an uplifting proposal and to ban the domestic ivory markets, and unfortunately that didn't come to pass, and I think the EU had a big role to play in that.
Right, Professor Ho Wenping, what stood out for you?
Yes, I think it is quite encouraging effort. As my colleagues from London has just mentioned, now China and the US, those both leading country, one is the quite biggest consuming country. I think now they're joined hand in hand to fight very strongly with this anti-poaching elephant issue. You will see, you know, both countries has already made a promise to ban completely about those ivory export and import. Actually, I have noticed that quite a lot of measures has been already done by Chinese government. Number one is this earlier this year, right. A lot of those illegal ivory those tusks has been destroyed, and also some those outlet of those sale outlet has been also closed. Either factory and shop has been closed, and quite a lot of people has been sent to jail if they are doing those illegal ivory trade issue. So great measures has been taken already.
Let's look at the great measures that have already been taken. And David, that agreement that was reached to close the domestic trade in ivory, could you clarify for us exactly what does that mean? What does that entail? What is the time frame for implementation, if at all?
Well, there's several things here. I mean, domestic ivory markets are still happening around the world. China is taking the lead on this, which is fantastic. As the other speaker was saying, that what they've actually done is they actually banned the auction of ivory and rhino horn products back in 2012. And there was a 90% reduction where people in China weren't investing in those products anymore, and that had a massive impact on the number of elephants that were being poached. So, as I said, China is taking the absolute lead on this and showing the way. And again, they've taken initiatives by their Forestry State Department and by their Postal Service. They're actually now inspecting all the items coming in, and are one of the lead countries that are actually taking all the initiatives and steps to deliver their elephant action plan. But for us, I think because there was a watering down of the proposals at CITES, what it means is that we've seen countries are recommended that they close their domestic ivory market. So I think it's still left some scope for ivory markets and domestic illegal trade to take place. One of the other disappointing things, I think, you know, within the UK we've taken strong measures to stop the sale of post-1947 ivory. But there's still a legal ivory trade for antique market in the UK, and again, we would love to see that closed as well. Right. So there have been some really good things around actual states selling ivory, but for us, I think at I4, it's the fact that unless we close the domestic ivory markets, unless we stop putting a value on elephant ivory, we won't take away the price tag on an elephant's head.
Right, Professor Ho Wenping, though China was pushing for a much stronger statement on ivory and ivory trade and market closures. The outcome on that particular issue, was that a satisfactory outcome for China?
Well, I think we have seen already some positive outcome. Actually, apart from those government measures, I think the most important thing is to educate people, because in order to limit this market and change people's consuming behavior, the education is very necessary. Nowadays, we have heard quite a lot of good things. For example, those famous celebrities, now they have been mobilized, and then they have to done a lot of those advertisements to tell people if don't to consume those ivory made either the jewelry or some other issue. So we have to protect those wildlife like elephant. So those education, I think, has generated very good results. Now people realize now this is not good consuming behavior to protect the wildlife in this global village. That's everybody's duty, everybody's responsibility. So I think this mass education to people, I think is very necessary. That should be combining with government measures.
Right. David, though, there was some debate at the CITES conference from African countries regarding countries such as South Africa, Zambia, Namibia, and Zimbabwe, who argue that their wildlife, their elephant populations were not really at risk. What was their argument exactly? Where were they coming from, and why were they taking that position?
Well, I mean, sort of, they've obviously not suffered, you know, they've protected their elephant populations in some areas, but it's not a universal picture. So they do have growing elephant populations in some parks, and they're saying, well, we've got a large elephant population, we're protecting it, it shouldn't need uplifting. But what we're saying is you need to take, you know, a whole African approach, you need to take a continental approach and look at the state of the elephants. We've seen massive declines. There was a great elephant census survey which took place, and it reported a 30% decline in elephants. So they've lost 144,000 elephants in 7 years. I mean, that's a massive decline in any population. And what we're saying is, you know, that what they should do is look at the whole of the continent and say, actually, elephants are in crisis. Botswana, their nearest neighbour, and Botswana has 35% of the elephant population in Africa, was calling for an Appendix 1 uplifting and saying we should not just look at the elephants in our own country, we should look wider, because this is a real problem with poaching that's going on. 100,000 elephants were poached in a 3-year period alone. So I think, you know, we can't be complacent. There should have been a precautionary approach for the uplifting for Appendix 1, that we can't stand by and let domestic ivory markets and stockpiles remain. Ivory needs to be worthless, and that's the only way that we can actually save the elephant is, as our colleague was saying in China, that, you know, education, really important. Law enforcement and legislation, really important. You know, good work on the ground by those enforcement agencies are vital if we are to stop the poaching. But it goes down to the markets. If there's no market, you won't get the poaching. So again, that education, making sure people are aware, is vital. And once again, China is taking the lead. You know, and you know, which is fantastic news. We need to all follow and make sure that we are actually doing the education our side, but also the law enforcement.
And just to come back,
I4 has got a new project. It's running in Kenya with the Kenyan.
Just to come back, David. Sorry, just to come back to your to the Pan-African agenda that didn't seem to be. Why is it exactly though difficult for the African countries to have one Pan-African agenda on this? Why were there so many divisions on this particular issue?
For me, I think there was a lot of unity on the issues, but there are a number of countries that still want to retain their domestic ivory markets, that still see ivory as something that can be sold and see a value in it that they can bring back into their economy. And that's the real issue. Is, you know, it shouldn't be. This is about a living creature that we're seeing. We're seeing elephants that are being slaughtered for their tusks, for a trinket, for a trophy. And for us, we need to make sure that that doesn't have a value, that's not putting a price tag on an elephant's head. And we need to make sure at the end of the day that those countries can recognize not just the elephants they have in their own country, but what's happening to the global population of elephants and the role that they have in helping to protect them and the responsibility they have as well.
Right. Let's look at some of the implementation processes, though, Professor Ho Weng-ping. What steps, though, do you see China taking, for instance, in implementing and enforcing that law on closing down that domestic trade for ivory?
Well, as I mentioned before, Chinese government has made a very strict implementation of all those relevant laws. You see, even President Xi Jinping and his counterpart, like U.S. President Obama, they have made a joint promise earlier this year. So I think this is a very serious call, even from these top leaders. So actually, we have relevant ministries in charge of those implementation, and all those from top to the down, from the the municipal, city to the county level, and then there is all different those government officials. They are take the full responsibility to check. I also want to mention, like back to 2014, when the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang visited Africa, he also visited that Kenya's monument site that burned those confiscated those ivory tusks. So during that visit, and he also mentioned the Chinese government will contribute, will donate like as many as $10 million earmarked for protecting the wildlife in Africa. So this message, I think, has been very strong, sent either to the international society, also sent to those Chinese domestic consumer as well, and also to those Chinese people doing business work or doing traveling in Africa. This message shows now this is zero tolerance for all those illegal trade with those ivory products. So those certification, I think, also generate good results to limit those illegal business.
Right. David, has this been a breakthrough, though, in elephant conservation efforts? Are we now going to see an end to poaching as a result of the proposals that were adopted at the CITES conference?
It's, as our colleague in China said, in relation to making sure that there's good education, there's good legislation, there's good enforcement on the ground. And you can see the difference that China is making in the world, and the fact, it led the charge at CITES with the US has been phenomenal for elephant conservation, and it's really put it on the world stage. Now for us, we need to make sure that domestic ivory markets are now closed, so we're going to have to try and keep on pushing individual countries to stop selling ivory, to stop seeing ivory as a product that can be traded or has monetary value. And also the destruction of stockpiles. Those stockpiles, Kenya again led the way in this. It burnt the ivory stockpiles and sent a message to the world that there should be no value attached with this. This is about elephants and about elephant conservation. And for me, that was a fantastic sign as well. And we just hope the other countries will follow suit.
Right. Professor Ho Weng-ping, do you think, though, that this is going to finally see, this is going to be a very good push, though, for conservation efforts? And what impact, though, is this going to have on the international and the global trade in ivory?
Of course, I think that's a collective effort. It's a long journey. So we need to make a collective effort, both from producing end and then to the transportation, that middle, and then to the consuming market. So in our end, in China, probably this is a consuming end. So we will do more to change people's consuming behavior. But in the producing end, that's in Africa, anti-poaching, I think, is also a very challenging task. There is some business going on with this poaching issue.
Right, and of course there's going to be a lot of work ahead there, David, from the producing to the consumer end there. What challenges, though, do you foresee for the future?
I think that the challenges are the domestic ivory markets that exist, and again the legal antique ivory markets around the world. For us, I think the consumer drive, and as the professor was saying, to make sure that the public are aware, they stop buying, they change their habits. But also, I think it's getting governments to close down those markets. It doesn't matter whether you've got an antique market and you're saying, well, it's old ivory. You are still sending a message, we're open for business, we're selling antique ivory. In the UK, we see ivory, which is being seized from Border Force and by the Metropolitan Police, and that ivory has been stained or antiqued deliberately, and it's quite clear it's destined for the antique market in the UK. Now, for us, it's saying that, you know, we need to make sure those markets are closed right the way across the world. We all have a part to play, as the professor said. You know, we are a global village. This elephant, you know, the elephant species depends on us for its survival, and we need to make sure there is no demand for ivory. Ivory stockpiles are destroyed, domestic ivory markets are closed down, and that we can get an Appendix 1 uplifting for all elephants. And it needs to be a precautionary approach that is taken by those countries because of the unprecedented levels of poaching over the last 10 years. That if we want to see elephants in the future, as the Duke of Cambridge said in the UK, if he wants his daughter to see them by the time she's 25, the only place could be a zoo. You know, we have the power to stop that. And as the professor said, it's us all acting together, and the accord that they have drawn up in China with the US, the work that the Kenyan government is doing is phenomenal, but it needs everybody to be able to act on this, to put their efforts behind it to stop the ivory trade.
All right, and that's all we have time for this week on Talk Africa, but thank you to my guests for their insights. In London, David Kadri, he's the head of policy and campaigns at the International Fund for Animal Welfare. In Beijing, Professor Hong Wenping, she's a senior research fellow at the Institute of West Asian and African Studies. Remember, you can join the conversation at home through Facebook, Twitter and YouTube, and do join us again next week for more on Talk Africa. Goodbye.